furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio, radio with bite.
Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. Tonight's episode is A Principled Approach. I'm your host, Allison Tiemann, otherwise known as Typhon Blue, and with me today is my co-host, Della Burton, as well as Diana Davidson and Karen Strong, also known as Girl Writes What, both back from the dead. Tonight, AVFM's radio director, James Huff, is joining us to talk about first principles. But before we get on with the show, let's get some business out of the way. All of us at Honey Badger Radio, the artist, the animator, the musician, as well as the show personalities, have other jobs to help us make ends meet. Because of this, we're all limited in how much time we can invest into creating show content. If you like our message and you want to see more HBR content, please consider donating to us or purchasing our merchandise. The donation button and link to our store can be found on our website at honeybadgerbrigade.com. In addition to freeing up time to produce more content, the money we collect goes to advertising to expand our audience and increase the scope of our message. Thank you to everyone who has already donated, purchased our merchandise, or simply viewed our YouTube archive without turning on ad blocker. You're doing your part to help us grow and help us expand awareness of men's rights. Also, if you're interested in past shows, please go to our YouTube archive at youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio and subscribe. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to AVFM Radio Director James Huff to give us a bit of a background on first principles and start the discussion rolling. Take it away, James.
Thank you very much. Now, the idea of first principles is not new. In fact, we can find the principles in various forms throughout history. We do know one of the earliest recorded philosophers to touch upon all five principles was Socrates, as written by his students Plato, Xenophon, and the plays of Aristophanes. What are the first principles? In short, a moral philosophy. They are a general guide in how to approach life without stepping on as many toes as possible and still provide maximum individual liberties to any community that uses them. And the first principles are divided into 5 points: personal accountability, personal responsibility, characterization by merit, non-aggression, non-violence, and respect for personal property. Now, each of these points has their own description, but any reasonable person would see how small groups of people adhering to these principles could coexist with fewer conflicts than what we see in the current zeitgeist. First principles are also a tool, specifically a measure by which we can look at various policies in the public sector and determine if they hold up to scrutiny under a simple moral philosophy designed to maximize individuality. For instance, does alimony meet the criteria for personal responsibility and personal accountability from the view of the one receiving it? From the view of the organizations enforcing alimony, aren't violence and aggression the primary means by which they extract personal property from the man they deem must pay? In any case, almost all analysis of men's issues when it comes to public policy and even quite a few social and cultural mores can be broken down to see if they adhere to first principles. But why use first principles when there are already lots of other people trying to tell us what the fuck to do? There are a few reasons. It's an individualist philosophy that cannot be enforced from a top-down approach without destroying the principles themselves. And the principles provide maximum latitude for almost every means of self-sufficiency without resorting to violence, coercion, or theft. It almost personifies the expressions of men going their own way distilled into 5 simple rules. And this part I will take directly from the essay, The Argument for a Principled Approach. The key to understanding how to deconstruct all of our issues rests upon these 5 principles. It nullifies the idea of a social contract because contracts must be recognized and entered into by individuals. It creates universality of expectations of behavior between individuals, destroys cronyism in all its forms by creating a meritocracy, creates competition based upon true supply and demand, and generally allows self-interest and personal liberties to be followed without infringing upon the life and property of others. It removes violence and coercion from a society that teaches these principles to their youngest and increases the level of volunteerism in society to correct problems that cannot be solved through contractual agreements. Now, individuals within the men's rights movement who work together and adopt these principles will have a powerful intellectual and moral tool upon which to analyze our issues and posit solutions, and a tool that nearly destroys feminist theory and practice as well. And with that, I'm handing the mic back over to Allison.
Thank you, James. That's a great introduction to first principles and what they can mean. And I think at this point we should probably take a look at how they apply more specifically to specific men's rights issues, such as alimony and child support and those kinds of debt-based gynocentrisms. For those of you who don't know, gynocentrism essentially means focusing on women's benefit. So why don't you explain a bit how first principles inform our understanding of, for example, alimony?
Okay. Well, when we take a look at the concept of alimony, we have to understand that the first two principles that we deal with are personal accountability and personal responsibility. Accountability is an internal measure of self-sufficiency without resorting to violence and coercion, as well as the willingness to face natural consequences for your decisions. Personal responsibility is external actions that can be seen and judged by others within that same sphere. Essentially, is this person self-sufficient, and are they, doing things without resorting to violence and coercion? And so, as far as alimony is concerned, it completely breaks down in the face of personal accountability and personal responsibility. People today have a lot of opportunity to be able to join the workforce. They've got a lot of opportunity to pick up a variety of skills. We find many women are graduating from college at higher rates than men. We find them the pay gap being just a farce. They have the ability to fend for themselves. So the idea of alimony goes completely against the idea of personal accountability and responsibility as far as, the women receiving the alimony is concerned. From the view of the type of organizations that make decisions to force men to pay, well, they only get these resources through the threat of violence and aggression. Either you pay this woman with your personal property, which you have earned through the sweat of your own brow, or we're going to send men with guns to remove your liberty and make you pay anyway.
I find the first principles is, essentially comes across like a argument for a political system, right? So it's opposed to just talking about men's rights versus women's rights or equality and things like that. It has some aspects of government, but when you think about feminism and their whole patriarchy theory, essentially what they're talking about is government. That's what they call patriarchy. It's the white male system, and their attack on patriarchy, to take down patriarchy, is essentially what they're saying is they want to attack the government and change the government. So feminism isn't just a movement focused on increasing rights for women. It's a movement focused on changing the political system in which we live. It's a very political movement.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is seen very clearly in writings such as the Red Stockings Manifesto, which was published late 60s, early 70s. They very much wanted to go ahead and alter everything having to do with the governments of the world. And strangely, while they did not accept or did not want to accept any other male-centered philosophy, they sure as hell ran towards Marxism just as quickly as they could. That's within the context of the Red Stockings Manifesto. So I see the first principles, if practiced across the society, yes, there are only certain types of politics that are going to be played out. Most notably, you will see forms of capitalism. You will see probably a minarchist-style government, primarily centered upon enforcing contractual agreements and common defense without all the extraneous stuff. But the principles provide something that feminism does not. Feminism does not have a moral guidance. It does not have food for the individual to basically look in the mirror and say, hey, am I doing X, Y, and Z? First principles starts from the individual and provides some very clear-cut, non-ambiguous morality to move forward with.
Well, one of the things I was thinking is that in the age of marriage 1.0, where it was considered to be a lifelong contract and the gender roles were clearly defined, where the man was clearly understanding that he would be that when he said I do, he was taking financial responsibility for a woman for life, and these were the rules when the two people said, when he made that promise. If he decided, I could even see if he decided, that's it, I don't want to be married anymore, and he was the one at fault. He was the one at fault for the divorce. I could even see alimony being acceptable in that paradigm under those circumstances, because he entered into the contract freely and he was the one who broke the contract. Right? I could totally see that. But now we have, ever since women emancipated their income and their property from the institution of marriage, ever since they had the right to hold their own property and hold on to their own income, ever since they had all of those things, it's completely obscene to hold a man accountable to support a woman for the rest of her life, even if he was at fault, let alone if she was the one who was desirous of a divorce just because she was unhappy. So, I think even the concept of alimony, just the concept of it, doesn't necessarily violate first principles as long as everybody knows that they're entering into a contract, as long as everybody knows what they're promising, and as long as the person who broke the contract is the one who is penalized.
Well,
right?
that is absolutely true in this case. But once again, we're looking at first principles working best in the type of era in which we live. We've got plentiful information. We've got plentiful resources for education. First principles is a standard pretty much for developed countries to be able to move forward to the next step. And while, 50, 100 years ago, first principles would have been extraordinarily hard to enact in total, in the spirit of what it is that I'm talking about, by all means. Yeah, alimony, the marriage contract, things of that nature, could have very easily have fit in. Unfortunately, these social contracts are no longer upheld through any legal system that we have. It's pretty much everyone for themselves at this point. And so we need something like first principles in order to help mitigate the type of damage that is being caused to men in society.
I think the great increase that we've seen in divorce over the last century has been a symptom, a major symptom of the abandonment of the first principles. If you take personal responsibility and you are held personally accountable for your behaviors, and you know, even characterization by merit, if you place your value in your partner and you put your partner first because you have placed your value in this person that you love, this person that is important to you, how can you end up getting divorced? If both people in the marriage do that, how can you end up getting divorced? You know, if you're non-aggressive, non-violent, if you cooperate with each other, as soon as you start abandoning those things, that's what ends up leading to people becoming bitter about each other, becoming, uncaring towards each other and cheating on each other and abusing each other.
Well, sure. I mean, it is easily a good set of principles to hold if you're inside of a committed relationship. But the fact of the matter is that the idea of the social contract today is laughable. The first principles, as a result, is designed to be very individualist in nature, to fit right alongside men going their own way. And while, yes, this set of principles can fit with most lifestyles out there, one thing it does not fit into people who are not willing to be accountable and responsible individuals.
Well, one thing, too, you mentioned the social contract is laughable. One of the most amazing things I found about, when I look at family law, is that even in that case, the legal contract is laughable. Basically, when you sign a marriage contract, you are agreeing, you're signing a contract blind. The terms are completely malleable, and they are open to complete interpretation or reinterpretation once there is a dissolution, right? Like, even the idea that you can sign a prenuptial agreement and a judge can throw it out, right? That's just obscene, because it's a legal contract, and a judge can say, yeah, no, that doesn't actually count, right? And the fact that it's till death do us part doesn't actually count. And the fact that, you joined together to have children and those children were the children of the marriage, yeah, that doesn't count. And now I'm going to completely rewrite your contract as you two people are exiting it. That is something that I find absolutely bizarre. It's just completely insane. And so it's not just the social contract; it's the legal aspect of things that is completely ambiguous. You don't know when you get married, you have no idea what you're signing. You don't discover that until you're dissolving the marriage.
No, and that is one of the reasons why the whole idea for the non-aggression, non-violence, and respect for personal property rights is placed in as part of the principles. I've had a lot of people who say, look, the idea of personal property rights has no place within the principled approach. And I argue to them, well, when you're faced with things like alimony, you tell me how you're supposed to frame violence and aggression being used against you to strip away what you've spent half your life working for. You have to frame it in the context of, hey, this guy worked hard to get hold of this material or this money in order to live, and you are removing that from him with an act of aggression and violence, and giving it to somebody who doesn't want to or doesn't feel like being self-sufficient and willing to face the natural consequences of their own actions.
Well, I mean, it sounds like personal property is an aspect of personal liberty, because you don't get property without labor, and labor is, as far as I can tell, until we have androids, in order to get property, we have to use our own labor, which means we have to use our own bodies. So it's an aspect of bodily autonomy, to respect people's property rights. Before I go on, though, I do want to remind people that this is a call-in show, and if you want to call in to talk to one of the co-hosts, me or James Huff, please do call in. The number is 1-310-388-9709. That's 1-310-388-9709. We definitely want to hear from you and hear what you have to say, and what you want to, if you have anything to say on first principles and how they apply to men's rights, or even want to argue that principles can lead us off a cliff, as they certainly have with the feminist movement, please do call in and bring your ideas to the table. And having said that, gotten that show business out of the way, I did want to point out an issue that I have with first principles that I think that first principles can't address, and that is the natural tendency of cultures and societies to offer more compassion and concern to women. And I want to hear James's response to that, and how first principles can deal with that kind of a asymmetry in how we care about men and women, which results in an asymmetry in how we deal with men and women legally, even in a situation of equality, of legal equality.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I bring first principles within the context of the men's rights movement. I don't think first principles by themselves are going to be enough to address the problem that you've described. I think it takes a lot more than that. If it didn't, then I would not be doing all the other types of activist things that I do as a men's rights activist. The first principles is part of what we do, and we need to continue to educate. We need to continue to educate men to protect themselves, and we need to continue to rail against, well, the zeitgeist that has been going on for the last 5,000 years or so. And no, I don't see this as being anything that can happen overnight. When I look at first principles, I look at a intergenerational approach. 80 years is my best estimate if people start hopping on the bandwagon. I see lasting cultural change in 80 years, and perhaps something akin to what I've envisioned within 120. This is a long scope out, and while we work for immediate legislative and social reforms, keeping these first principles foremost in our minds and actually moving the goals as we go along down the years toward a more first principled society will keep us from sliding back into old forms of gynocentrism. And that is pretty much how I see it.
I think that the principle of merit actually addresses that concern as well. The description under merit, for me the word merit covers a lot more. I have a lot of pride in everything that I acquire in my life because I know that if I have it, I worked really hard for it. And there's been lots of times or opportunities I've had where people, might have just given me things, but I always preferred to work for it because of that, that merit-based thing. I worked in the film industry, which has got a fairly well-deserved reputation. But when I worked on a show, everybody knew I had that job because I was good at what I did. It was a very important principle, to the point that I didn't date anybody in the film industry for most of the time I worked there until the very end, because I never wanted there to be rumors. I wanted everybody to know that I deserved the things that I had. And merit is a principle that isn't applied to women in general. they are basically, because vagina, right? They just ask for stuff and they get it because vagina. And it's still not good enough. They're, still crying, oh, it's unfair that all this ice cream and that stupid video that they made, is going to all the men. They're so focused on possessions and property and things that they haven't earned for themselves that, if you were to look at the merit principle, I think that does cover gynocentrism and starting to demand of women that if they want something, they need to go out and they need to get it for themselves.
Well, I do agree with the idea of that characterization by merit is one part of actually taking care of something like gynocentrism. And on the surface, the first principles appear to destroy gynocentrism at its very basic form, but we still have to leave some latitude for further discussion and theory and understanding about what it is that drives each one of us and how best to guard against sort of backsliding, even in the name of something like the first principles, to attempt to create protected groups and provide them with goodies from the mass just because they happen to have dangly or non-dangly bits.
I wanted to speak to something that Diana brought up, basically the dispensing ice cream machine. And I did a video on this, but what I found hilarious is that this thing is just dispensing ice cream and nobody asks, where does it come from? Yeah, that was, it just comes out of the sky? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about the idea of respect for personal property rights here, then yeah, I mean, you're you've got a few people who have a massive investiture in capital, and then they end up feeding thousands of other people and their families over time. I mean, that's where your ice cream is coming from, is from people who have the capital investments to be able to afford to set up the types of businesses, especially with all the regulations we have, by which other people get their ice cream. And so what? And so what if most of those people happen to be of one particular color or another? I mean, at the end of the day, they're still answering to the point of a gun as well. In almost every society.
Part of the problem with the feminist ice cream narrative there is they're not always defining ice cream as ice cream. If men have it, it's ice cream. If women have it, it's shit. And when men have shit, that's ice cream too. And so they can look at everything men have and say it's better, and therefore we want some and we're not getting any. And it doesn't matter to them who made the ice cream, because they're making it up as they go along. But I also wanted to go back to, in the earlier part of the discussion, we were talking about, first principles as applied to feminism. And one of the problems that I have with feminism is that they rob women of the expectation that of being expected to meet the first principles, being expected to have personal accountability, being expected to take personal responsibility, and in being robbed of those, of having people expect those things of you, you end up with two things that come out of that are handicapping. The first one is that because you are robbed of those, people don't take you seriously. But the second one is, because you're robbed of those, you don't strive to do your best. You don't strive to be the most successful person you can be as yourself. You end up becoming less of a person, less of an adult, because you want to lay back on society providing for you. You want to lay back on that gynocentrism. And what really is going to kill gynocentrism is that we have to be able to understand that compassion has two definitions. There is compassion for the other person, and there's self-centered compassion. And the self-centered compassion is, I want to feel good about what I did, and so I'm going to take that as this is for that other person. And that it feels compassionate because you feel better about the other person's situation when you're done with it. Real compassion is giving someone a leg up in that you do the best you can to be supportive of their independence, their accountability, their responsibility, their ability to show their merit, as opposed to just providing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I see absolutely nothing wrong with the concept of charity and the concept of volunteerism. I think one of the things that's missing in a lot of the socioeconomically challenged portions of the United States is a concept of volunteerism. We've got people who are living across the door from just across the way from each other. They don't even know each other. They don't step out into their local communities. They don't interact. They don't attempt to have a community-centered spirit. I mean, you created all this dependence through feminism. And as a result of this, you've got an entire generation of people who treat each other like strangers at a daycare. That's really the only way that I can put it. Everyone wants to go play with their own little toy in their own little corner, instead of understanding that if they actually work together for a little while, it may be difficult, may be hard, there may be raised expectations involved. God forbid somebody think that you might want to pick up a hammer and set to your neighbor's house and try to repair it. But look, the whole idea of First Principles is to move us outside of these bubbles that we've all placed ourselves in and start getting us actively involved in the communities in which we live. And in doing so, you take the average standard of living to a whole nother level. When you do that, you begin to actively educate other people when you do that. I'm a very strong proponent of the boots on the ground and the teamwork system when working with various projects in the men's rights movement, because I recognize that the idea of volunteerism must be present in any society that attempts to adhere to the principled approach. And that is the only way you're going to be able to affect great change for the people who are really down on their luck. Rather than just giving them that handout, you end up teaching them everything they need to know to survive, and they become a stronger link within the community as a result.
This actually was one of pardon me, one of the most amazing things about living in a very small town. It was about 3,500 people. And when I separated from my ex and I knew money would be tight, I kind of ran into somebody downtown. The downtown there is like 2 strip malls, by the way. And I ran into her. I knew she worked at a different restaurant than the one I worked at, and I had just basically mentioned to her, well, do you know if they're looking for any, if they're hiring, whatever, I've just separated from my husband, and I'm going to be needing a little bit of extra income. And she let me know that she would ask, and this was in the late fall, and she was also a volunteer firefighter. And at Christmas, bam, at my door, about a week before Christmas, I have the volunteer firefighters there with a gigantic sack of gifts for my kids and a huge 25-pound turkey, right? Just because she heard that I was looking for some extra income, she just got everybody organized, and then the restaurant involved that I was asking about, they got together a whole bunch of help, and gift cards and stuff for the grocery store for me and my family. And I mean, that's what happens in a very, very small community where everybody knows each other, right? And I think it's not necessarily, I don't know whether it's modern times or whether it's the fact that we live in these huge impersonal, so many of us live in these huge impersonal communities where you just don't know your neighbors. There are too many of them. I mean, I have 1,500 neighbors in the same amount of space that I had 50 neighbors where I was living before, right? I can't know everybody. And when you don't know somebody, you see them as an object. You don't see them as a person that you care about in the same way as you would if you were living in a place where everybody knows each other and everybody, and you can't leave the house and go and buy a quart of milk in under 45 minutes because you're chatting with everybody that you run across, right? So, I think that it's maybe a sign of just the way we live, the kind of structures in which we live, these kind of super urban structures with the suburban sprawl outside of them, and we're all sort of isolated. But yeah, personalizing people, humanizing people is really how you do it, and it's really dehumanizing. I find it really dehumanizing to say, oh, I'll give $10 to some kid that I'll never meet, and I'll never see a picture of them, right? I just know it's going somewhere. It's going somewhere out into the ether, that $10. I don't know if it's doing anything, and I never will, right? So I think that personalizing things is probably a huge part of who is willing to volunteer their time and effort and money. And one of the interesting things, too, I was just watching a video by Stefan Molyneux. He listed some statistics, and it is conservatives, Republicans, people who voted for Bush donated 3.6% of their annual income to charity, and people who voted for Obama donated 1.9% of their income to charity. So, yeah, kind of makes you think, if you expect the government to take care of it, why would you bother, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that is part of the problem, but the question comes down to whether or not the government is capable of taking care of the type of problem that exists within your community in the same way that the people that exist in that community could take care of the problem. I mean, you either have a one-size-fits-all approach, or you've got this huge, massive bureaucracy that has to take a portion for their own survival, has to take a portion of the funds that would go toward a community in which you live. I mean, yeah, the questions come up in first principles as to these large superstructures when it comes to politics and things like that, but and we could argue and debate those superstructures all day long. I have for hours with other MRAs. But the meat of first principles is actually what we are doing on an individual level and how we can best use first principles to flip the feminist narrative on its head and to make people understand that feminism creates a culture of dependence and isolation that ends up destroying hard-earned gains that people make in their day-to-day lives. And first principles are there to try to mitigate those types of things.
And with that, I'm going to once again ask for people to call in if you have something to ask James about first principles, or if you want to talk to the hosts about this particular show topic, the number again is 310-388-9709. That's 310-388-9709. And now we're going to have a commercial break, and then we're going to come right back on the show topic, First Principles.
From AZFM Radio, this is Think Tank with Nicholas Alaverdian.
I'm Nicholas Alaverdian, and this week on Think Tank, we'll be bringing you the latest in news, arts, and culture with a red pill perspective. Our guests include Rhode Island State Senator Nicholas Kettle, author and MRA Attila Windsor, abuse prevention advocate Charlie Stecker, and Tim Casper, attorney for a man who had his small business shut down by a feminist prosecutor in a way that will make you drop your jaw. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. London, only on AVFM Radio.
Take the red pill.
Join AVFM Radio Director James Huff and AVFM News Director Robert O'Hara every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central for A Voice for Men News and Activism. This is the weekly radio show that brings you news from the front lines of the men's rights movement, along with interesting and important guests. Come and get your weekly dose of news and commentary about what's going on with the state of men and boys all over the world and what's being done about it. Listen every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. The time for waiting on the sidelines is over. The time to act is now.
Hey everybody, this is Aaron Clary, a.k.a. Captain Capitalism. Look, I got a great book out there for any student who's going to college or for any parent who has a kid going to college. The title of the book is called Worthless. It is the indispensable young person's guide to choosing the right major. You can find it on Amazon.com. It's in paperback, Kindle, and Audible, all for a lot less than what your kid is going to pay for tuition. That's Worthless. You can find it on Amazon.com.
That's the sound of a glass lens being broken. Most people view the world through a narrow lens, ignoring factors and concepts that don't fit their predetermined worldview. I'm Della Burton, author of Breaking the Glasses, written from an anti-feminist perspective with a focus on men's rights and certain social issues with an unconventional spin. You can check it out at breakingtheglasses.blogspot.com. Join me in breaking those dogma-tinted glasses.
I'd like to warn some women out there. If you're in college, it's dangerous out there, Jane. There's rapists all around. Most men are rapists, right? Any man could be a rapist. Is it 1 in 5 are raped? So it's risky. I think women out there should not go to college. It's dangerous. I mean, if 40 of you women are walking the campus at night, 10 of you will probably be assaulted. That's too high a risk. I wouldn't go to college. You know, go to an online college. This is Gary Costanza, and please check out my YouTube channel, Jerry the Other. That's Jerry the Other, Jerry the Other, no spaces. Bricks of logic may fly out. Take care.
And we're back. Once again, that call-in number is 310-388-9709. Please do call in if you want to direct some questions to James Huff about first principles, or even question the concept of having principles. Again, that number is 310-388-9709. And now we are going to go to Diana, who has been waiting very patiently to add in her 2 cents. Take it away, Diana.
Thank you. I think this, discussing first principles and ways to organize the way people relate to each other ties in really closely to the MGTOW movement. MGTOW got a lot of attention in the men's rights movement because what they started doing was creating their own environment, right? And with first principles, you can say we could take these and we could try to insert those into the existing government, or you can just organize your own small communities that are based on principles like that, whatever you decide as a group, as your social group that you interact with suits you. And, there's no need to overthrow governments or anything like that, or to take on trying to change a bigger system. You can actually just create the community in the way that you want to live, and then just live in that community your style. Of course, there's some interference when you have income taxes and, things that, the rules within the society that you're living, right? Those are going to have some effect. But I think instead of trying to take on some leviathan, some major thing, if you were to just figure out ways to create your own environment, almost like a kibbutz or something like that, and start to build your own society within the other society, then you can build your power in a way that's almost untouchable, because it's an agreement between the people that you choose to interact with, in the same way that MGTOW say, I choose to not interact with women right now because women can't be trusted, right? And then some women may prove themselves, may have that merit, may show that they're accountable, and may follow these principles, and could find themselves becoming a part of that community again. And essentially what MGTOW is doing is, creating little kibbutzes where you find and bind yourself to the people that you do find have the same principles and that you do find you can trust.
Absolutely, freedom of association is one of our, one of our first and foremost rights, and the principles very much allow for that basic freedom of association to occur. And look, even one single community that adheres to first principles could look at another community that does not, and essentially shrug its shoulders and pretty much say, well, as long as they're not coming over here and don't try to mess up our area, there won't be any problems. Which reminds me, one of the things I sort of do want to get across is the idea of the non-aggression, non-violence principle is not pacifism by any stretch of the imagination. So when you have these individuals or these small communities, kibbutzes, they are perfectly capable of defending themselves in any appropriate manner, up to and including lethal force if somebody's life is threatened. You do have the right to self-defense. You do have the right to defend your property, and that is that is one of the basic things when it comes to the principled approach that I think a lot of people misinterpret when it comes to systems of aggression and violence.
Thank you for that, James. Once again, I'm going to give out the call-in number, which is 310-388-9709, and I'm going to bring on a caller. Nick, you're on air.
Well, I'm going to blame my craving for Ben & Jerry's on all of you right now. All of that talk about ice cream earlier.
The ice cream dispenser in the sky. So you said you had a question for James. You want to lay that out?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, absolutely. It seems like men are kind of burdened with an almost monastic existence in this contemporary society, and in the modern age, with a complete lack of emphasis on philosophy and educating oneself to adapt to a principled approach to life. James, what do you think are some of the crucial strategies and methods that you would encourage people to employ so that to come into that?
Okay, Nick, I missed the last part of your question. What strategies do I think are useful to employ to do what?
What strategies and methods do you think are conducive to living a principled approach-based life?
Well, look, not to sound all Bible-y, but you're going to have to render unto Caesar. I think Diana really did point it out. Look, you don't sit there and rock the boat and attempt to evade taxes and things of that nature. That's the very first step. Is keep your nose clean when it comes to what is lawful within your society. Do your damnedest to practice that freedom of association. Find opportunities in the marketplace that are conducive to your lifestyle and go for it. We see a lot of people just settling for the status quo. Now, don't get me wrong. We're looking at 20 to 30% of the energy expenditure or labor required for your average MGTOW to subsist comfortably as compared to a guy who's married with kids. But you also have to keep in mind that a lot of these guys are probably going to have a little bit of extra time on their hands. They're probably going to attempt to achieve higher education and move up a social ladder in one way, shape, or form. Even if they are going their own way, they're still going to have interests. They're not going to be living like hermits. And I would encourage people to pick up hobbies on top of everything else. I mean, it's really a matter of keeping your sanity in a world that continually pushes us to the very bottom rung of society.
And you would agree that continuing education is an absolute imperative, or I should say, absolutely imperative.
Look, I think the acquisition of knowledge is an absolute imperative. I'm not college educated myself, and while a lot of people would scoff at that, I have found myself moving along just fine inside of circles of doctors and lawyers, because I've continued to educate myself by whatever means possible. It didn't mean I had to spend $100,000 on an education. What it did mean is I had to practice a form of self-discipline and crack open books. And while I'm rather eclectic with my approach, look, there are a lot of people out there who are self-educated, who speak wisely about a great many issues, who I've met throughout my life and respect greatly. And it is those types of associations, when you move toward that self-improvement, it's the types of associations between that knowledge that's best going to keep you out of trouble in the long run.
Well, thanks so much for taking my call, and I will continue to listen to the show. Thanks a lot, you guys.
All right.
Thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us. And I'm going to move now to Night Runner, who has been waiting very patiently. Night Runner, you're on the air.
Hello, how is everyone tonight?
Oh, I'm doing well, and I'll let James answer for himself.
Doing just fine, Night Runner. How are you?
Very well, I guess. I'm going to kind of make an argument that I don't necessarily agree with myself, but I want to hear you explain it, James, about the personal property rights. If someone wanted to, they could make the argument that personal property rights are kind of combined in with the personal responsibility and personal accountability, in that if we hold an individual's or the government, or should I say and or the government, to a personal responsibility and personal accountability, then that means that that individual or the government is not going to be taking our property away from us.
Well, look, government in any form will require some type of stipend from the populace. It's not like you're going to have the President of the United States be the one to directly pay for the defense budget. It's not like you're going to have your local mayor or your council members pay directly for the police budget in the area. So, I mean, government in every case does require some form of stipend from the population that it supposedly is supposed to serve. Okay, that being the key phrase. Okay, what we're looking at, however, especially when it comes to first principles as relates to feminist theory and practice, is that it is not serving us. In fact, it is to our detriment that our personal property is being stripped away and being put towards institutions that malign men and boys and continue to feed us a horrible education system in the process.
Well, look at it from what feminist, what was it, the Michigan chapter of NOW, I believe it was, about equal parenting. One of their main grievances was the fact that not as much money would be going to divorced mothers. I mean, that right there, feminism, they want to throw men under the bus, and they want to throw women or children under the bus just so women can get shit that they didn't earn.
Well, yeah, I mean, Go
Sorry,
ahead,
go
Karen.
ahead, Jim. Oh,
no, go ahead, Karen.
One of the things that gets me about the personal responsibility and the personal accountability as applies to government is that if the government is accountable for mitigating the consequences of your mistakes, and if the government is responsible for your upkeep, right, and then aren't you the personal property of the government? Right? Like, I have a house. It's my responsibility to maintain it, right? I own and this is one of the things, this is one of the most bizarre things. There was an episode of The Simpsons with the screaming caterpillar. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was years and years ago. The screamapillar. It was an endangered species. And the moment, as far as the EPA is concerned, the moment you find an endangered species on your property, you are responsible. They don't pay you to do it. You are responsible for maintaining that creature's habitat, and if that creature dies, you can be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right? Spotted owls, burrowing owls, things like that. Basically it's like if you find a Mona Lisa in your basement, right, and you don't spend the money to keep it up, the government could fine you all kinds of money. So the best thing you could do the moment you find a Mona Lisa in your basement is to burn it, right? Because before anybody finds out it's there, right? Because the government is going to hold you personally responsible and personally accountable for something that you don't own. But if you are actually holding the government personally responsible and personally accountable for your own upkeep and survival and well-being, one would think, under the sort of the auspices of property rights, whoever is accountable and responsible for property, you would think that would be the owner of that property, right? So if you are relying on the government for your bread and butter, you're basically saying the government owns you.
You bring up a very interesting point with that, especially as we consider the amount of female-oriented programs that are currently in existence and running through the normal taxpayer system and all the government coffers. I find it very telling that we live in a society where feminists like to speak of women as being owed or taken care of by the various government systems out there. However, it is actually men who at the age of 18 literally sign a contract that stipulates that the moment the government wants to, it can turn you into government property.
Yes.
So I find that very telling. We're expected to fend for ourselves as men, but we are the property.
Even signing that contract, that isn't saying I'm willing to let the government turn me into the government's property. No, that is actually being the government's property. It is. You are. You can be called upon at any time. It's like you're still employed even if you're only on call, right? You're still subject to your employer's demands even if you only work on call. Even if you're just a substitute teacher and you don't go into work every day 9 to 5, you're still employed by your employer. The government still owns you. The moment you sign that selective service card or get a driver's license or get any number of other services from the government where they automatically register you without your knowledge.
Well, here's
we're signing
the difference.
over ownership of your body to the government.
Right. Here's the difference, though. You see, when you get to an age to where you can be employed, okay, you are making a conscious decision to move forward with a contractual agreement. And look, as long as you are making a conscious decision to move forward with that contractual agreement, and you understand the stated terms of the contract as signing, then yeah, you're going to be held to that. So if your employer says, well, let's take the military, a volunteer in the military, for instance, hey, everything he needs to know is in the contract and within the laws of the Universal Code of Military Justice. A wise individual would study these things before signing the contract. And once you sign your name on that contract, you are at the beck and call of your officers 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And this is exactly what you signed up for. Now, but as soon as a male is born as a U.S. citizen, he is not knowingly consenting to a contractual agreement. That contractual agreement is forced upon him, and in all actuality, it's not even a contractual agreement. All that selective service card does is formalize the process whereby the government now says, yes, and now you know that you're property, so you can't claim you didn't know because you signed the card. That's really all it's about. And if you don't sign the card, even though you've been told you must sign the card, then we're going to make sure your life, your quality of life is not as good as what it could have been.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here and just indicate that Night Runner had a bit of, we were having a bit of problem with Night Runner, but he is back on. So if there was anything you wanted to add to this, Night Runner, go ahead.
Yeah, the whole, what James was saying about the draft, all that is to make you feel like that you're not being forced into something. You're going to go down and sign up for the draft because it's what you're supposed to do. Well, yeah, okay, they give you that choice, but how is it a choice when, if you don't do this, we're going to seriously mess with you. So all it is smoke and mirrors to make it feel like we have a choice when we really don't.
Yeah, I liken it to slavery in a lot of ways. Granted, it has certain stipulations on it, but that's essentially what it is. And people want to call this a social contract, and this is supposedly something that you are just born into. And I find that idea absolutely abhorrent. First Principles is designed to remove the idea of these types of social contracts. People can actually make decisions, when they are old enough and wise enough to fend for themselves and to freely associate themselves and their property with whomever they choose. What do you think?
I wanted to bring up something that's kind of connected to what we've been talking about, but it just was crossing my mind earlier on, that our current society is promoting a lack of accountability, and which is one of your principles there, that with the social justice warrior tendencies and demands that are being put upon us, that everybody's being essentially taught to pass the blame in the same way that feminists use the patriarchy to excuse all the shortcomings that a woman might encounter in her life. Right? So if a woman has trouble accomplishing some task, it's never her problem, it's never her fault, it's the patriarchy that's disadvantaged her somehow. So the society that we're engaging with all the time now is basically teaching us to not take accountability, to not feel empowered to affect the world around us, to change our circumstances in any way. We're being taught to blame somebody for it and then to demand compensation in some way, which also leads to this insane level of court activity where everybody gets sued for anything. I mean, ridiculous stuff, like some guy thinks that he can put his Winnebago on cruise control and he doesn't have to steer it anymore. and it goes off the road and he can sue somebody for it. Right now, that's just one of those absurd examples that's not necessarily connected to feminism, but you can see, how feminism and social justice warriors are encouraging people to, just sue anyone for anything all the time because they're not personally wanting to take any responsibility for improving their lives. They want to demand other people fix their problems for them. And, feminists blaming all of women's shortcomings on patriarchy, it's just a monster in the closet. It's intangible, and that's why it works for them, because everybody goes, oh, well, I can't prove that you're wrong, they think, and they forget that it's up to the feminists to prove that they're right, that prove that patriarchy actually exists, that there's such a thing, and that it's the organized type of thing that they claim it to be. And even the governments are falling into this blame and scapegoating. I got a call from the Conservative Party. It was really actually quite fun being on their calling list, and I wish I hadn't ended it. They called me to complain that the CBC, their own broadcast company, has a liberal bias, right? So one of their callers is like trying to explain the problem to me, right? The CBC is like giving people bad information. It all has a liberal bias. It's like, wait a second. Don't you own the CBC? So, you're calling me to complain that you don't have control of your own corporation? And the guy didn't really have an answer for it, right? But it's the mentality behind that really scares the shit out of me. We're living in a world where nobody, including our own government, is willing to actually participate in their own existence, take charge, do things, and be responsible for their actions. Extremely scary state of existence.
Well, and look, this is oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And what's interesting is that as much agency as we abdicate, as external as we will make control over our lives, the more we want to say that somebody else is responsible for us, responsible for our decisions, the bigger and bigger government gets, the bigger and bigger the court system gets, the more powerful these entities get. Heck, even the more powerful corporations get, because they will all step into the gap and say, well, we'll take control. We'll take control from you. We'll make things fair. And that's the funniest thing. When you talk about fairness, the idea of fairness, that's the eternal cry of the social justice warrior, is this idea of fairness. But it assumes that there's some sort of big sky daddy or sky mommy or some sort of government parental figure that will make things fair. And it assumes that it's not up to you to adapt to the circumstance and eke out whatever you can from it. It's up to some other authoritative figure to make everything fair for you. And they certainly will make things fair, and in the process grow so large that they're almost they grow so large as a tyranny, as a power over all of our lives.
Well, I think you bring up a very succinct point with that. We've given up our own agency in a lot of ways, and the idea of personal accountability and personal responsibility at its very base level, as it applies strictly to individuals and very small communities, is meant to take that power back one step at a time. This will destroy the idea of the social justice warrior and destroy the idea of feminism in the long run. We can lobby for and work for legislative and change all we want. We can do the same thing with social and cultural norms, but I think until we begin to re-implement some basic idea that we are all responsible for our own destinies, we're going to continue to run across these types of issues.
One of the problems that has caused the issue that Allison was talking about earlier, these programs that just keep growing and growing and growing. We in the United States, we have this war on poverty, and this whole concept that you can eliminate poverty by taking money out of the economy and putting it back into the economy. And it's kind of like trying to fill a bucket by taking water out of the bucket and putting it back into the bucket. And I had this argument recently with somebody about this. The problem is that we are not, we're right back to that personal accountability, where we are not holding people accountable for how they respond to assistance. But we're also, and this is a big one, we're not holding the civil servants accountable for the results of their decisions. So they create these programs and they, increase the size of these programs and they redirect the activities of these programs, but they never quite put anything out there that has the effect that they claim it's going to have. And I'm not trying to run down all public assistance. I know that we're never going to totally eliminate situations where people simply cannot support themselves. There are people that are incredibly handicapped. There are people that have situations that are extraordinary. But this idea that we need to have these huge, ever-growing programs and that the program can be allowed to fail so miserably that instead of a decrease in poverty, that there is a continual increase in poverty, and we don't care about it, that we keep supporting these ideas, is ludicrous. So we're to the point now where it's like we've completely forgotten about accountability for one's decisions and accountability for the results of one's decisions, to the point where we're allowing that lack of accountability to completely govern us.
Well, one of the really, really, really ironic things about what you just said is that about 90% of the programs, the money that the government puts out in welfare benefits, in food stamps, in Medicaid, in all kinds of other programs, right, to mitigate poverty, none of that actually is counted by the Census Bureau as income. Okay, so basically you could have a welfare system where welfare recipients earn above the median income in the U.S. just through welfare payments, and then they qualify for free health care and they qualify for this, that, and the other thing, right? But because they have zero income, they are considered to be below the poverty line. This is one of the most hilarious things about how they measure poverty, is they don't actually control for all of the stuff, all of the measures to counter poverty. So no matter how many measures they include, they will never be able to eliminate poverty, because the more you give people, right, the more you maybe subsidize them so that they don't have to work as much, you're only going to actually increase poverty according to how they measure poverty, because, say, that woman who was working 2 full-time jobs to support her kids, then she goes on welfare and she's like, oh, now I only have to work part-time. Well, she wasn't living in poverty before. Now she is, because somebody else is footing her bills, right? Because they're not counting the money she gets from government in her household income. And they're not counting any of the subsidies and benefits and food stamps and Medicare, Medicaid, premium assistance and all of those things. They're not counting any of that as money out of the calculations when they calculate poverty. So nothing, the way they measure it right now, nothing the government can do to mitigate poverty will actually do anything but increase poverty, and then you will get calls for more programs that will do nothing to mitigate poverty as we measure it.
And I'm going to take another caller now, because it's people have been waiting very patiently to come on the line and ask us questions. Vagabond, you're on the air.
Hello all, and good evening. Oh, good evening from where I'm from, anyway.
It's evening here, too.
Hello, Honey Badgers. Hello, James. Thank you very much, all of you, for all the work that you're doing for the men. And particular shout out to Karen. First time meeting you in semi-person, Karen, and thanks to your efforts and your video, in particular, Feminism and the Disposable Male. I was introduced to the entire manosphere and got a little bit or a lot more comfortable with myself and well-being.
Excellent. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And not to be outdone everyone else at the table, thank you very much for all you do. Just one question, because my questions usually take a little long to answer.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Possibility of future healthy relations.
Vagabond, you are breaking up extraordinarily badly.
Yeah, I put Vagabond on mute. That was really bad timing because he was in the queue for at least 40 minutes, and then I brought him on, and he started to break up.
Yeah,
we will
no,
try to get back.
Yeah,
we'll try to get Vagabond back in a bit. But until then, let's go to Fatherless. Fatherless, you're on the air. Hello,
Hi.
Fatherless.
I had a question. Actually, I also wanted to take an opportunity to thank Karen. Watching her videos last March was probably the first time I felt like it was okay to be a man. I sort of internalized a lot of shit, but that had been my strongest impression. But I wanted to move on to my actual question. I wanted someone to explain to my inner liberal, because the strongest counter argument that I know against these kinds of individualist, organizing principles are the federally mandated desegregation of schools back in the day. And I wanted to know how you would rectify, how you would deal with those kinds of issues through this framework, which is to say people really weren't individually desegregating.
Well, nobody was actually attempting to live through a first principles approach either. Do understand number 3 is characterization by merit. Put it simply, the ability to judge others based upon their personal responsibility. This means other people should be judged by whether or not they are moving towards self-sufficiency without resorting to violence and coercion, and whether they demonstrate a measure of personal accountability by facing the natural consequences of their actions. And this is true regardless of the external features of the individual being judged. So an adherent to first principles
that's an answer right there.
Would not care whether or not someone is a particular skin color or a particular sex or identified as transsexual or transvestite from the planet transsexual. Nobody would care. The question is whether or not you're capable of moving towards self-sufficiency and whether or not you are living without introducing violence and aggression into the community around you.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much an explanation right there. What about, and this is just another sort of question regarding this. What about the subconscious mind? What about the parts of your decision-making process that you're really not in control of?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to refer back to what we were talking about earlier when we take a look at gynocentrism, sort of flowing throughout history, and it only being exacerbated even more recently. My argument for these individualist principles, as opposed to what we have seen, is: have we seen an increase or decrease in the amount of overall misandry as a result of the loss of ideas such as personal accountability and personal responsibility. And I don't think we have ever particularly mastered characterization by merit. This is where conscious level decision making comes into effect. This is where it is my job and the job of anyone else who considers themselves an MRA to talk to people, educate people, let them know, hey, there are certain prevalent attitudes we do need to watch out for. There's a reason why I look in the mirror every single night and make some sometimes very harsh judgment calls on myself. And I think some teaching others to be able to be introspective enough to sort of thwart some of those subconscious demons that occasionally come up when it comes to our animal instinct is very important.
So the gem there is really, we've never really lived up to the principle of characterization by merit.
No, we never really have. But we have an opportunity in front of us, especially in this technological era, and in an era where we have an opportunity to create less and less competition, direct personal competition for resources. We have an opportunity to do that. And so we have a greater opportunity to move towards characterization by merit. That's going to be a conscious decision. That is something that needs to be taught in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think that new technology is bringing us closer to that as well, because a lot of what we compete over, competition in quotes, is now just people's interest in our ideas through the internet. To use an example, I know a woodworker who created this a very interesting invention called a pentagram, which essentially takes a router and can reproduce if you don't know what a router is, it basically is a mechanical device that carves wood using like a bit. And he can take a die and he can reproduce it at half scale and it's incredible. And he has 300,000 subscribers. So in this new age, it's almost people's interest that has become its own currency. And that is definitely merit-based. Did you have a thought? Did you have anything to add to that at all, James? Or shall I go to the next caller?
No, I think you summed it up very nicely.
Thank you, Fatherless, for your call. And please do call again. I'm going to move back to Vagabond, and hopefully we can get him on without any cross-interference or technical difficulties that we had last time. Vagabond, you're on the air.
Oh, I don't know. It sounds kind of breaky-uppy. Can you hear me clearly?
Just a sec. I'm going to try shutting myself off. You asked your question after you can no longer hear me.
Okay. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead, Vagabond.
Okay. Thank you very much. My question's kind of hard to put, but it's kind of basic and it's kind of not. But it's regarding the future of relationships in the Western world. And is Karen there?
Yeah, Karen's here. We can
Karen's
bring her
here,
on.
but Vagabond, just ask your question, because
okay.
the problem is that we need to try to keep your line as clear as possible, which means we have to reduce how many other people are on the line. So ask your question, and I'll bring Karen on.
Yeah, I'll just ask the question and let you guys go at it. Because in several interviews with Karen, between her and Paul Elam and her and Aaron Pitsey, it was mentioned a couple of times, with Aaron in particular, her saying something to the effect of, I don't know how we're going to be able to repair the damage caused by the feminists and government between men and women, basically. And, well, I wanted to put the question on the table. We have the, what was it called again? The first principles on the table. We have 5 heads in the room. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
As far as that goes, I think. Pardon me, I have a bit of a laryngeal virus right now. But as far as repairing the damage goes, it's going to happen one way or the other. You know, humanity is going to be reconciled one way or the other. It's either just, it's a matter of, in my opinion, it's a matter of either it's going to be the easy way or the hard way. And some people think the easy way is going to be through economic and political and legal reforms that will equalize things and make things more fair and equitable. And the hard way will be through collapse, in which case traditional gender roles will become unavoidable just due to biology and necessity, because everything will just go into the shitter. Other people claim that the latter route is the easy way and the former is the hard way. So, you know, I'm not sure which one is going to be easier or harder, but I do know that one way or the other, humanity is going to reconcile. Men and women are going to reconcile. It's just a matter of, are they going to do it out of mutual respect and mutual accommodation, or are they going to do it out of necessity, biological necessity, right? Because all of the birth control pill factories have been, you know, bombed, and the nuclear plants are leaching radiation, and everything's just gone into the toilet because we've let things go too far. So, you know, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how it will go down. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about the fact that it's whether it's going to happen. I would be the one worrying how it's going to go down and how that's going to impact both sexes, because I can guarantee you an accommodation and a reconciliation based on mutual respect and equity would be much, much easier for women to deal with in this age than ending up in a sort of an indefinite kind of episode of Survivor. So, yeah. That's pretty much what I got.
I think both of the paths that you were talking about are the hard way. I don't think there's going to be an easy way to get out of the situation that we're in. Because on one hand, if we do face a social collapse, an economic collapse of society, wherever we end up with that is going to be a horrible situation in and of itself. Because that's going to entail real terrible poverty, not just, you know, not being able to afford what everybody else around you has, but starvation. People in the United States talk about poverty. Most of the people in the United States who talk about poverty have not the first clue what poverty really is, because they've never really paid attention to what life is like in third world countries and in war-torn countries, in situations where people starve to death because there's no resource for them to tap. Not just because nobody provides it for them, but because they don't even have a chance to provide it for themselves. And that's the kind of situation that we would be in a collapse, is that we will be facing things like that. At the other end of it, you know, government reform, social reform, those are things that are going to be a long, hard road. They're never going to be instant. They're never going to be easy. They're always going to be work. And even if we make those reforms, when we make those reforms, they're not going to be a permanent thing unless we make an effort and we work and fight to keep them in place. Because look at what, back to the United States, look at what we've become in just a few hundred years, where we've gone from where we started out. This is not something that we can just say, well, we have this fix, and once we get to it, it's done. This is going to be a forever thing.
Well, I actually think that everybody on the planet should read a blog post called The Misandry Bubble to sort of get an idea of, and the person who wrote it said, I predict this, and basically said the equivalent of what I said earlier today or yesterday. I will bet my left little toe, that it's going to go down this way. But basically outlining a huge number of socioeconomic and political factors contributing to the situation now and where he thinks they're going to go within the next 10 years. And he believes that the misandry bubble is going to burst within the next 10 years, and things are going to come back down to some semblance of sanity and equity. Now, I really, really hope that he's right. I really do, because this would be the least painful and least regressive way for things to go down. But I'm not betting it. I'm not even going to bet my left little toe on things going down that way, just because I know how absolutely staunch ideologues can be. I mean, like, look at the Jonestown thing, drinking poison Kool-Aid. I mean, and all you need is for the majority of those ideologues to be women, right? And then so the majority of women are like, well, what's the harm in it? And then 3/4 of the men are like, oh, well, all the women agree, what's the harm in it? Like, it isn't really factoring in that idea that all things being equal, 4 out of 4 times women will side with women, and 3 out of 4 times men will side with women. And so if all the women are siding with women, then 3/4 of the men are siding with women, then, the vast majority of the population is really looking out for what women consider to be in their best interests. I think everybody's always looked out for what is in women's best interests, but it's just been who has called the shots as far as what is in women's best interests. And right now, that's feminists. So, done.
And so that's definitely check out the misandry bubble, and let's hope it doesn't come to total societal collapse. That we can figure out a nice, we can figure out this true equality thing, and start dealing with the problems that men face in a fair and just way. Thank you, Vagabond, for your call. Sorry I can't bring you back on, but your line is quite iffy. I'm going to move now to Nightwing. Nightwing, you're on the air.
Okay. I have some thoughts on the whole societal collapse. Even if we do actually work out the whole misandry bubble and get through that, I think we are still in for the societal collapse due to government and other such factors. And part of that comes from looking at how everybody fights, left versus right. You're wrong, I'm right. No, a lot of the time I see when I'm discussing things with people, be it on political scale, on gender politics scale, whatever, it's I'm not willing to give up what I believe. And sadly, I think that's going to force the societal collapse more than anything else. Your thoughts?
I've got a couple thoughts about that. The idea about whether or not there will be or won't be, to me, is sort of a moot point. I work as hard as I can to try to keep there from being a societal collapse. In the case that there is a societal collapse, I have tried during the time I've had on this planet to teach as many people as possible a method by which they can rebuild a society based upon the principled approach. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have a whole bunch of warlords running around everywhere, cutting people's heads off just to get a few ears of corn. Of course, that's going to happen. But eventually, we are probably going to collapse, I'd say, no further than 1850s technology at the worst. And because of whatever's left, we're going to simply rebuild right the hell back up within about 50 to 60 years to some semblance of what we have now. I'll bet more in pockets of civilization than huge, gigantic countries. The question is whether or not we want to continue to have the current zeitgeist move forward and everybody not learn from the mistakes that were made, or whether or not we can introduce the principled approach toward looking at our social issues and sometimes our political issues and actually move forward on a community basis with these individual principles in mind. That's all I've got to say on that matter.
Did you have anything else to add to that, Nightwing?
No, I'm still figuring it out because what I've heard of the first principles, I have to agree. Most people don't follow them, or in a large portion they say they follow them, and of course they're hypocritical and lying to themselves.
So your concern is that you can't realistically base a society on first principles because people don't really follow them?
Realistically, I think we can, but like you said, we have to consciously notice when we're slipping up, and a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to sit there and say, no, think of themselves as such great people. They're doing so well. They're doing what they think is right, even though it's harming other people.
Yeah. Well, there's always the error in understanding. Well, with any set of principles, it all comes down to how well the group of people actually embodies them and sticks to them. But thank you for your call, and thank you for your input. Appreciate your call.
Good night.
I'm going to move now to Nikki. Nikki, you're on the air.
Hello, this is great. Wow, being on Honey Badger Radio, this is awesome. I was gonna. Well, first I wanted to say I just looked up that article Karen mentioned about the misandry bubble. It looks great. Wow, and it's nice and long. I sort of buy into the perspective in which that article was written, which is that artificial intelligence and the accelerating pace of technology is really going to address these social issues that we have. But the original reason I called is to ask about how feminism seems to have been so successful in rewriting the dictionary. Because it's like feminists will usually say, oh, just look up feminism in the dictionary and see what it says. Isn't that what you're for? And, I'll go and look it up, and it'll say advocacy of equal rights for men and women, but that's not what it actually is. They seem to have been able to redefine equality itself, as it says in the show notes for today's Honey Badger radio show, and I just wonder how are they able to do that?
How they're able to do that is because they're women, and women have a certain social privilege. Women have always controlled language. If you've ever heard the phrase, oh, we would never say that in mixed company, right? You would never say that in front of a woman. They have always had the social power to put restrictions on language and they're also on average more gifted language-wise than men and more able to manipulate language in order to get the reaction that they want, and they're also more able to manipulate people's emotions on average to get what they want. And so there's a whole host of things, just the social privilege that they have and the average higher capabilities of using that, flexing that muscle. They have a huge amount of ability to dictate what words mean. Look at how they've redefined misogyny. It's not hating women anymore. It's not a person who hates all women anymore. It's any person who disagrees with a woman. That's a misogynist. Even if the person who's disagreeing with a woman is a woman, right?
Yeah.
She's internalized her misogyny, right? She has internalized misogyny. So, it's obscene the way they are able to do it, but, basically you could maybe make the analogy. I actually was watching a video from Bane666 today, and he said, yeah, and you wouldn't think that the definition of a plane was a terrorist weapon, would you? You wouldn't see that in the dictionary. An airplane.
Yeah.
A weapon of terrorism. But that's how it's been used.
I also wonder if maybe they were able to do that by rejecting a more basic principle that's not on the list of first principles, which is just the law of equality itself, the law of identity. The very notion that A is A. That it is something is capable of being something without being something it's not at the same time. It's like there are more basic principles that they seem to just have discarded. You know what I mean? Like it's not possible for a leaf to be entirely green and entirely red at the same time. Really, just basic ideas. Is it possible for a woman to be entirely oppressed or entirely free at the same time? Maybe under their laws. Maybe under the principles which they've accepted. If they have any.
Well, what I would say is that feminism does. It totally does. It is totally about equality, as feminism defines equality. There's the catch, and there's the real problem, is that feminism says it's about equality, but only the equality that feminism gets to define, and every other definition of equality is illegitimate according to feminism. And feminism won't look at the other side to determine its definition of equality or how it comes to its decisions about equality. Which really begs the question, how do you know it's equal if you won't measure the other side? And you essentially preclude having to measure the other side by saying, well, male privilege. And male privilege is axiomatic, and we don't have to prove it, and it exists, and because we say it does. Looking at it from their point of view, they are totally for equality as they define it. But I would also argue that feminism is a way of explaining rationally a very, very old emotional prejudice, which is the belief that women are acted upon and men are actors. And fundamentally, feminism explains why we can keep that bias in the modern era when women have more legal liberties than men do, when they are essentially first-class citizens and men are second-class citizens, because, let's face it, men are obligated to conscription, even in those countries where conscription isn't technically on the books, because it's still the social expectation that men sacrifice their lives to protect their country. As soon as the governments want it, it will be back. So men are obligated to conscription pretty much in every first world nation. Women aren't, and yet they get the vote. That is the very definition of a second-class citizen. So even in this situation where women are first-class citizens, where the legal system favors women, in sentencing, in family courts, pretty much across the board, we can still believe that women are oppressed, that women are functionally acted upon because of feminism. And it's a very, very entrenched emotional belief that we have, that women are acted upon and men are actors. It's why when you see a woman stab a man, the first thing out of people's mouths is, what did he do?
Yeah.
How did he act on her to cause her to do that? Because they can't accept. They can't
or what
accept
in general made her do it.
Yeah. They can't accept the idea that she is an actor. And in particular, it's extremely difficult for people to accept the idea that women can act upon men. It's like oil and water for most people. So feminism functions as a stopgap, explaining in the modern era how we can still see women as acted upon. And that's why I would argue that feminism got a lot of its emotional and political and social clout. It's just an explanation for this old attitude. That's about it. So I'm going to cede the floor to Diana, because I know that she has been waiting patiently for me to stop yapping and running my mouth. Go ahead.
Yapping, you're awesome. The dictionary came up earlier, and in regards to the dictionary and feminism, I actually have a feminist dictionary. It's just crazy. Right? It's brutally obvious they don't understand what a dictionary is and what it means, about how words are defined and used properly. Like, they'll have a word, and they actually will, instead of describing what that word means, just have a quote from a feminist that had an idea on the topic. Hopefully I'll do a video about it, because it's just like, it's going to be an endless source, a gold mine of material. That's the feminist dictionaries, and there's probably more than one out there, so I'm going to see how many I can get. But one of the reasons I've ended up at the doorstep of the men's human rights movement is my love of language and my utter contempt for what feminists have done to it. And there's nothing more erotic or beautiful to me than the ability to communicate ideas, and feminism is a grave threat to that one true love. So when you mentioned the dictionary and feminism, I was just like, oh, brother, let us talk, because this is, if you had no other reason for joining the men's rights movement, just your love of the dictionary. For God's sake, make them stop.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And
I love Honey Badger Radio. It's just great.
Well, I'm glad that you love us, and we love you, our listeners, and you calling in and bringing up these great topics and things to discuss. And definitely do call in again.
Okay.
We are now out of callers. I can give a call, a shout out to anybody last minute wants to call in, 310-388-9709. If not, we're going to have to sort of wrap this up and do a final round robin, get everybody on board and saying their final words to the topic. Again, that number is 310-388-9709. Looks like nobody's calling in, so I'm going to call James on board to give his final thoughts on the topic and to help show us out at the end of the show. James.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot, especially with the first two principles, the idea of personal accountability and personal responsibility. Those are probably the two most individual affecting principles that are there. As I've stated before, nowhere throughout human history have we truly practiced the idea of characterization by merit. People have always tried to move towards self-sufficiency in one way, shape, or form in almost every society out there, and most people are willing to understand the cause and effect and then face the natural consequences of their actions. But yeah, things like characterization by merit and the idea of not aggressing against others and respect for property rights, I think that those are things that need to be taught. And within the context of the men's rights movement, we have an opportunity to be able to use a relatively simple set of principles to place against feminism, especially the policies that feminism puts forward into our educational systems, into our courts of law, into our legislation. And so far we've all tackled these things at one angle or another. I'm positing first principles as another very useful tool for people to use, especially people who have a more individualist idea of what makes the world go around. And I will be writing more in the future on the nature of the first principles and expounding upon what each one of them means. I would invite you to go to the First Principles Initiative at blogspot.com and check out what I've written so far. Feel free to comment. And I really, really appreciate Honey Badger Radio for giving me the opportunity to be able to talk about this subject.
I thought Typhon had an announcement here, but to sort of speak to the relationship.
Sorry, Della. Sorry, Della. What I wanted to get out there was just to repeat the website for First Principles, so that people can go there and comment and start getting a discussion started with James about First Principles. Could you repeat the website name again, there, James?
Sure, it's the First Principles Initiative.blogspot.com.
That's First Principles Initiative.blogspot.com.
Yes.
Correct? All right,
Correct.
Thank you. Apologies for interjecting, Della. Go ahead.
That's fine. That's fine. Now, what I was basically going to say was, in not holding, as I was talking about before, in not holding our own civil servants, the people that we vote into office every election, accountable and responsible, and not holding them responsible for the results of their choices, their actions, their votes in office, the legislation they introduce, the people they appoint, the agencies they create, every little thing they do, we are giving feminism the power to use the greatest violation that they use, their violation of non-aggression. And by feminists' definition of aggression, they are the most aggressive people in the world. They talk about aggression as a use of power to get, and violence even, as a use of power to get your way, even when you are not violent, even when you are not forceful, just power and influence. You're aggressive if you use power and influence. Feminists use the power of exploiting the proxy victim status of women to get everything that they want. And so if we would just hold our civil servants accountable, if we would just keep track of what they do. Pay attention to your government. If you look up government agencies, just the listing of existing bureaus and agencies, departments in the federal government in the United States, you would be amazed just at the size and scope. So basically, that's my request for everybody. Looking towards meeting first principles is don't just take personal accountability, don't just take personal responsibility, but be responsible for holding your government responsible. If you want to fight feminism, if you want to fight misandry, that's probably one of the strongest things you can do.
Your talk about aggression actually leads into the final point I wanted to make here, which is one of those principles we didn't talk about as much as the others tonight, was nonviolence. And nonviolence in activism is quite amazing. I really would like to see people look into the types of actions that have been taken in a nonviolent manner and the effectiveness of those things. So, for example, in the Golan Heights, or Golan Heights, however you say it, I think it's Golan Heights, when they went to arrest some people for not having their cards on them, everybody threw their cards or burnt their cards or got rid of their cards. It's been done a few times. So there were too many people to arrest, right? That's kind of similar to this recent, it started as a joke, but it's become a really cool thing of an accuse-a-thon, right? Just flood systems with too much that, for them to handle. And there's no violence involved in those types of things. And looking into the kinds of activities that can be done in an activist manner that are nonviolent can and will result in some amazing ideas that we can pull together and come up with some interesting ways of trying to bring a balance and a civility back to the society that we're living in that feminist has corrupted.
Well, I actually think that the accuse-a-thon, the response to the accuse-a-thon, was ridiculous. This is a nonviolent action. This is just Gandhiism at its finest. It's just passive resistance. It's just like, okay, so here's this system that's open to anybody to use. Okay, we're going to use it. We're going to do what we want with it. Oh, nobody said that we weren't allowed to use it in this way. There's no rules saying that we aren't allowed to use it in this way. So we're going to do it, right? And nobody's getting hurt. Of course nobody's getting hurt, because if men falsely accused by women were not coming to any harm, then a women's studies professor who was accused of anally raping somebody while screaming, "Misandry don't reel," or an anonymous woman named Fatty McFatfat, right, who's being accused of raping somebody, they're not going to come to any harm. So, I mean, I just, it's insane how they can actually claim that these actions are actively harming people. And the whole non-aggression thing and non-violence thing, what do we get? We get nonstop accusations of being violent misogynists, and yet all we do is preach non-violence and non-aggression, right? So I just find it's just bizarre. It's bizarre how the mainstream and how feminists especially digest our message, right? No matter what we feed them, they get indigestion, right? So there you go. But.
Yeah, well, I think it ties into, of course, my framework that we see men as actors and women as acted upon. Therefore, every action that men take in a negative way is amplified. And for some reason, if you're a woman advocating for men, your actions are seen as simultaneously sinister, but also a result of Stockholm Syndrome or some abuse. Yeah. It's ridiculous. But it's that time again, the time to end the show. And to give thanks. Thanks to our listeners and our callers. For those of you who are first-time listeners, you can access the YouTube archive of our shows through our website under the heading Archive. And don't forget to check out our store. Our website can be accessed at honeybadgerbrigade.com. Thanks once again to my co-hosts for always keeping it real. Thanks to Phil for animating our ad every week, to Europa for his amazing art, and to James for keeping everything running smoothly, and for joining us today to talk about first principles. I'd also like to give thanks to A Voice for Men for helping us out with hosting of this show, and to Reddit, Men's Rights Reddit, for giving us a sticky every week. So, to everyone who's listening, thanks again. Tune in next week, same Badger time, same Badger station.
This is Honey Badger Radio, reminding you to take the red pill.